All right, thank you everybody for joining us. And it's a real honor to introduce Dr. John Boockvar, not just because he's a Netflix star, but Dr. Boockvar is the vice chair of the Department of Neurosurgery at Lenox Hill Hospital and a professor in the Department of Neurosurgery at the Zucker School of Medicine. He's world renowned for his expertise in the management of brain tumors. And for anybody that watched the show, we know that his goal is to cure glioma and glioblastoma. Dr. Boockvar has held a number of leadership experiences and is going to share with us some of his reflections as a senior neurosurgeon. So we're really grateful to have you here, Dr. Boockvar.
Well, thank you so much for having me so early on a Saturday morning. So,
thank you for joining us early on a Saturday.
Whoever actually posted on Instagram yesterday and tagged me, thank you, because you reminded me of this calendar hold. So the power of social media. Well, good morning, everyone, and it's an absolute pleasure to be here. I kind of feel somewhat awkward in some of these Zoom calls because you just think you go about your day and your career and in anonymity. And so one of the best things about the show is that I get to do things like this. And of course, with COVID, we never anticipated the power of these kind of media. So the combination of the show and COVID has led to an explosion of meeting people like yourself and this organization. So I'm just so grateful. Obviously, I'm not grateful for COVID, but I'm grateful for the silver lining that this allows us to do and to share our experiences in media that we never would have met before this. And yes, you may have watched the show, but you never would have talked to me on a Zoom had it not been for COVID and our way of educating. And with our Brain Turns summer internship, which if anyone doesn't know what that is, that's our virtual internship that we do every summer. We started with COVID. We had 16,000 students participate in our virtual internship last year from, I think, 55 countries. And so that just explosion in our ability to touch lives, particularly at your level, has been incredibly impactful for me. I know for David Langer and all of us. So thank you. It's just such a great opportunity for us to exchange ideas. And, students are a great resource for ideas, even when they think they don't know anything. So thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So was this going to be more conversational, or I don't know if you had any slides that you wanted to
I did not, I did not prepare any slides. I think
conversational is.
I think slides are great, but I'm sort of anti-slide at this point. We're all slided out. So I like to take some questions. I can give you some of the ideas that I think are most important for success, not just as neurosurgeons, as trainees, medical students, pre-medical students. Tell me a little bit about this organization, and then we can go from there.
Yeah, so we're the Medical Student Neurosurgery Training Center. So we were basically founded originally out of some of the training camps that were run at Cornell for medical students in 2018 and 2019. And now we've grown, similarly with COVID, we never really would have seen ourselves holding these widespread, webinars that are attracting people from across the world. It was pretty localized to in-person training, but we had to make that pivot. And it's, been a real pleasure for us to be able to do that. So silver linings for sure. So it's primarily focused on medical students. There might be, a few residents. We tend to have other physicians as well from other countries that log on. So I imagine you're speaking to, kind of a global audience that ranges the gambit, but probably is more consisted of trainees.
Well, as you know, I started at Cornell. When I left Penn after my residency, I went to Cornell, and that's just when we started doing the residency boot camps and in person, obviously. And then when I got recruited to Northwell to help build the neurosurgery program at Lenox Hill Hospital, again, those educational experiences are really, really important. And I think, as you know, in all aspects of leadership, you develop leadership at a pretty young age. You may not know it, but it's really important to actually hone those skills. And in addition to leadership, making sure that you're quite disciplined and making sure that the people you surround yourself with are lifers. And they come back. My closest friends in neurosurgery are some of my co-residents, people I train with. They're the people I rely on when the shit hits the fan. That is a recurring theme in neurosurgery. This is a battle. Your career is a battle. You're going to battle burnout. You're going to battle time constraints, physical constraints, emotional constraints, psychological constraints, and making sure you have the right people to help you fight that battle, whether it's your spouse, your loved one, your family. It's extremely important at your age to develop these techniques now. Don't wait and don't procrastinate.
Advice. So maybe to just start the discussion, tell us a little bit about what leadership as a neurosurgeon looks like to you. And we know that you hold a couple of different roles in your institution and more nationally.
Yeah, I think leadership, like everything else, is at the local and national level. I love being involved in national organized neurosurgery, and I don't love just being the president of a society, for the sake of being president of a society. I like sharing, when we go to national conferences, for example, we have ultimately 3 or 4 main national societies. And as a leader, you really want to go there with the idea that I'm going to cross fertilize, that I'm going to use my expertise in research or clinical productivity, and I'm going to meet people who are going to help me move the needle, not just because I say I want to be president of the Congress of Neurological Surgery. So we are fortunate enough, we being David Langer and myself and others, have gotten to that level of high leadership nationally. And that's really great because you get to exchange ideas at a national level. For example, we have a new trial called an omental cranial transposition for bypassing the blood-brain barrier trial, where we take fat from the abdomen and I put it into the surgical cavity in the human brain. Never been done in humans before. When I went to a recent conference, I was put in the same room as Mike Lawton, who's a very well-known vascular neurosurgeon at the Barrow. And that cross-fertilization, yes, Mike and I can talk all the time, we can text, but actually sitting in a room at a conference and being able to discuss those ideas, and then bringing your students and your residents, people like Devin O'Donnell with us to these kind of meetings are important to pass the torch, because you guys are bringing ideas from the bench and the bedside as well. Some of my students have been actually the idea generators behind some of our major needle movers. So that's leadership. That's how I view leadership at a national level. It's programmatic, but I don't just go to meetings so I can, have fancy dinners or anything like that. That's useless. I have 4 kids and a wife that I'd rather spend time with. But actually more on a day-to-day basis is leadership at the local level. What are we doing at Lenox Hill Neurosurgery to make our program the best program in the country? How do we define best? Obviously, the best outcomes, safest. The best neurosurgery, which is best outcomes and safest. But also the best education, the best training, the best mentorship. And it's hard to do that. And of course, my job is to provide the best research experience, for the diseases that we're challenged with. So it's a difficult thing to balance. The role of the surgeon scientist, some people say, is dying. I say that's not true, but it goes back to what I said originally. I started training as a surgeon scientist when I was at Penn during my residency. I had great mentors in Don O'Rourke. Actually, Kate Carrico was at Penn when we were there. She made the mRNA vaccine for COVID for Pfizer BioNTech, and she was in neurosurgery. This woman saved the world. She literally is going to win the Nobel Prize. She saved the world. She worked in neurosurgery at Penn with David Langer when we were residents. By the way, no one thought at the administrative level that she was going to save the world. She was a Hungarian immigrant, and she followed her idea, and actually with David's help, stuck to it, and she literally saved the planet. So anytime someone says no to you or tells you that you suck, just use it as momentum, because you're going to save the world someday. And we've all been told no, and you suck. So, obviously I go to work every day with a very discrete goal: is how do I make this local department the best place for our patients every single day? And the the emotion that these patients are dealing with, particularly with brain tumors or what David does with aneurysms, is just incredible. Everyone thinks, oh, it's just surgery. There's emotional components to what our families go through. There's psychological components. There's financial hardships that you can't imagine that our patients go through. So it's not just being a great surgeon. I have an oncopsychologist that will talk to the children. I have a nutritionist that will help feed the patient. There are so many layers that go into that local leadership. Heck, I'm building an office right now. I have to tear down walls and rearrange people, and you know what construction does. So just delegate as a leader, be nice to everybody. If you're not nice to people, can't be a good leader.
Awesome. That was a great response and super helpful. Going with this kind of idea of building a team, how do you generate this kind of shared mental model or shared goal of a team?
I don't know. One of the books I read early was From Zero to One, which is Peter Thiel's story of how he built PayPal. And I'm going to leave out his political inclinations, but his 0 to 1 is our mentality, right? So there was 0 at Lenox Hill Hospital. So how do you go from never having a PayPal to developing a total change in e-commerce? David and I were blessed with this opportunity. We were given a really good hospital in a really good location in the greatest city in the world, in my opinion, to build a neurosurgery program. I mean, I don't think it's ever going to happen anywhere ever again where someone gets the opportunity to do that. And so we mandated that our financial incentives were going to be developed based on the team approach, not the individual approach, that our cultural model was going to be sustained above all other things. And I think as you develop and choose, and this goes for you guys, as you choose your medical school, and importantly, when you choose your residency, make sure the culture is your fit. Because if that culture is different, just because someone tells you maybe it's a better program or a better city or this and that thing, that doesn't matter. You want to go to a like-minded place. So what we built at Lenox Hill Hospital is a culture of excellence, but a culture of empathy and humanity. And we're human beings first. We have administrative assistants that have sick kids at home. We have single moms that have to leave early for work. We have every single either doctor, nurse, PA, or administrative assistant has an issue at home. My phone, my son called me yesterday and he's like, I think I have mono. He's calling me from college. I mean, I got to put down everyone has something. The bills have to be paid. At Lenox Hill Neurosurgery, we take care of each other. And I think that culture of camaraderie is what keeps people working. Remember, there are massive labor shortages right now, massive. So for example, at Northwell, in one position, we have 125 openings in healthcare administration. There are massive shortages. So if I lose administrative assistant or an executive assistant, it's going to be near impossible to fill that position unless I literally double their salary, which we have to do. In fact, there's a recent story where a woman got an offer at Cornell. I said, go get me the offer in writing. And I said, please get me the offer. She put it down on my desk and I matched it right away and I retained her. So we don't want turnover. Turnover is no good. It fosters, it doesn't necessarily foster. We want to build on our careers. We want to incentivize our junior people. And that's where our culture of excellence comes from. Obviously, we strive to do the most incredible neurosurgery with the best technologies and innovation. But what I'm most proud of at Lenox is the culture. I go to work every day and we have so much fun and we really, really take care of each other. And as a leader, that's the ethos that I want to display every day.
Great. Can you tell us about maybe any formative experiences that you had during your training that you now carry with you in your leadership position?
One of the things that I did when I think about, we all have sliding door moments. You know what a sliding door moment is, right? When let's say you're on a subway platform waiting for the 6th train and you just missed that 6th train. You have to wait for the next one. Who knows what's going to happen to you? You just had a sliding door moment. I picked a laboratory to work in at Penn. That was a very lucky choice. It was 1998. At the University of Wisconsin at that time, embryonic stem cells were just being described in the lab. So I was reading in Nature and Science about the derivation of embryonic stem cells by James, what's his name, Thompson in Madison, Wisconsin. And I was at Penn, and I fortuitously just chose a mentor who was like-minded to me, and he started looking at stem cell biology in glioblastoma. And I pushed and I pushed, and I basically helped to move his lab into stem cell biology in glioma. And he was looking at EGFR signaling in glioma at the time, and I put them all together. So I wrote a grant called EGFR signaling in glioma stem cell biology, and that really launched my career. So I was able to parlay his expertise in cell signaling with this very new science technology that was evolving and put it together against a really horrible human disease. And then I started getting grants. So when I think about one of the most important things that I did was to write that grant, to put those ideas in writing. And I didn't really get help doing it. It was my idea. So when you guys approach these things, hold on, my twin brother's FaceTiming me. Hold on. Your ideas matter. And basically that from that moment, his lab effort changed. I became focused on glioma stem cells. I wrote a grant, a human trial using erlotinib, which is a monoclonal, basically it's an oral EGFR inhibitor. I took that to Cornell. I got hired because I had clinical trial experience and I had research experience. So I was better than the next applicant for that job. And then my career took off in clinical trials and my passion to explore, glioma stem cell biology. I could have gone into any lab and it would have changed my career. In fact, I was dilly-dallying between a head injury lab at the time, Tracy McIntosh's lab, and that lab ended up closing. So, I think you'd be surprised. These are extremely important moments. So that's one experience. But actually, I want to tell you one other experience that I had in medical school. This is a true story, by the way. And when you talk about serendipity matters. So, I have 4 kids, and I walk around the house saying, chance favors the prepared mind, chance favors the prepared mind. My kids, they're like, Dad, just shut up. But that's what I always say, chance favors the prepared mind. And I walk around daily, and I say it at work too. I scream at my residents, chance favors the prepared mind, chance favors the prepared mind. In any case, I had a hernia repair when I was in medical school. I had a hernia orifice. I woke up from the hernia repair, and my general surgeon who did the hernia after my anesthesia said, "What are you doing this summer?" I was in medical school. I said, "I'm going to be a cardiothoracic researcher at Mount Sinai Hospital." He said, "Oh, I just heard a really good talk from a general surgeon on sepsis named Kevin Tracy. You should reach out to him." Fast forward, I was like, okay, I was probably still drugged from the anesthesia, but I moved away from the Mount Sinai lab. I picked up the phone. I called this guy, Kevin Tracy. Now, Kevin Tracy was at Rockefeller and Cornell, and actually was trained to be a neurosurgeon. He had jumped over from general surgery to neurosurgery, and it changed my life. He was my mentor in the lab. He ultimately left Rockefeller with 100 scientists and moved to North Shore University Hospital to start something called the Pickhour Institute. And he is now the president and CEO of Northwell's research endeavor. So he was one of the reasons that I got recruited back to Northwell. So again, I just randomly took a chance of a comment waking up from anesthesia to follow this general surgeon who ended up becoming a neurosurgeon. And here I am 25 years later, working with him, trying to cure brain cancer. Interestingly, his mother passed away when he was 5 years old from glioblastoma. So recognize that serendipity actually plays a huge part in your life. The question is, can you seize those moments? Sometimes, obviously, we don't know those moments. Look, another serendipitous moment for me was in November of 2014. I was at a bar in Manhattan, and who walks in the door but David Langer? I hadn't seen him in 10 years. He said, John, I just moved to Lenox Hill Hospital. Do you want to come join me? We were at a bar in Manhattan. So take advantage of those moments and don't be afraid to take a risk. No risk, no reward. But the most important quote is chance favors the prepared mind.
Oh, that I think that'll be the big takeaway from this hour. Chance
Absolutely.
favors the prepared mind. Awesome. So I know one thing you talk a lot about is the concept of gritfulness. How do you, kind of apply that to your leadership style, your approach to leadership?
So I guess those are some slides I could have shown you, but I was never taught. You guys are taught how to handle stress. We weren't taught to handle stress. We were just thrown in and said, here, this is what people before you did. This is how many hours they worked. So grit, flow, and mindfulness was a way, and I came up with this stupid word, gritfulness, because I had to remember. I'm a mnemonic guy. I'm a nickname mnemonic guy. So I needed a easy to remember term where I can also say to my residents, listen, gritfulness is the way I get through my life. All right, so what are grit, flow, and mindfulness? To me, those are the three easiest stress reducing principles, and also how you achieve peak performance in life. So one thing I want you guys to take away from is grit. Everyone thinks they have grit if they're going into neurosurgery, right? But grit is not just, practicing. Grit is actually, there's something called deliberate practice where you get feedback from a mentor. So if you worked in my lab and we did cadaveric studies, it would be redundant practice over and over again, the tedious dissection of the petrous carotid artery, where I give you, tactile feedback every Saturday morning. That's deliberate practice. When you talk about peak performance, some people, Malcolm Gladwell used to talk about 10,000 hours. The truth is you don't need 10,000 hours. You can achieve peak performance with deliberate practice at 8,000 hours. The key to deliberate practice is a couple of things: focus and feedback. So you need to have mentorship that provides feedback. If you follow basketball now, everyone's talking about Steph Curry. Steph Curry changed the game of basketball. Now, you don't know Del Curry, but Del Curry was sort of, when I was younger, I was watching Del Curry, and he was an incredible shooter. Steph grew up under Del's tutelage, learning how to shoot, the redundancy, that deliberate practice that he went out every day and got feedback from a mentor. And that mentor happened to be a very good basketball player. Steph Curry became a peak performer because of his deliberate practice, and he was fortunate. Same thing with Mozart, and you can go on and on. And that deliberate practice is what grit is all about. You can't just, you need to really, in order to be a peak performer, you have to improve your skill over time. There's no doubt about that. When we talk about flow, we talk about this state where it's effortless. And as a surgeon, if you're not in flow, that's no good. So you use your grit, your deliberate practice, your muscle memory. And have you heard the term manifesting? Everyone's talking about manifesting.
I feel like I've heard it and just don't.
Yeah, so manifesting is, as my daughter will say, you can manifest everything. So I want to manifest that I'm going to get an A in chemistry. You basically, every morning you get up and you basically tell yourself you're going to get an A in chemistry, for example, if you're my daughter. And when I had a conversation with her about how everyone is practicing manifesting now, the idea of mental representations is how I interpret manifesting. Mental representations is the other thing I want you guys to remember. You need to be able to form mental representations. So if you're Michael Jordan or a basketball player, or even if you're a concert pianist or an actor, peak performance comes with mental representation. So you'll see if you come to the OR with me that I stress that every surgery you must form mental representations of beforehand. And it's similar to manifesting. I need to know what exactly is going to be in my field of view when I get to a certain point in the tumor resection, because the posterior cerebral artery is behind that tumor, for example. So Michael Jordan used to say, I can see the ball go through the hoop before he actually released it from his hands. And then he dropped 63 points in a quarter at the Garden, for example. So mental representations are a big part of that. And when you develop mental representations, you get into the flow state. And that flow state is that effortless muscle memory takes over, and you basically glide through whatever exercise. It's the same thing with running. When you're running and listening to, Taylor Swift's All Too Well 10-minute version, you are just in flow, right? I mean, you are just nothing. You don't even know that you're running at that point, right? That is, another, example of flow. So yes, I'm a Swiftie. So that is really, as a surgeon, where we want to be. Now, how does mindfulness come into it? Mindfulness comes into it when the shit hits the fan in surgery or in life. There's a great book that I think you all should read called The Full Catastrophe. The Full Catastrophe is, or it's called Full Catastrophe Living, actually. And it's by John Kabat-Zinn. And he's the sort of Harvey Cushing of American mindfulness. And I can't emphasize it enough. And it's very relevant now because everyone's talking about mindfulness and manifesting and whatnot. But Full Catastrophe Living is basically the Bible of American mindfulness. So mindfulness, in my opinion, gets me out of trouble. It cools down your amygdala. And it's really focused on being present and coming back to your breathing. And I do that on the subway every morning. You can do it for 2 minutes a day, 5 minutes a day, 15 minutes a day. Find a time to focus on your breathing. If there's nothing else, if you practice a 4-7-8 breath, which is 4 seconds in through the nose, 7 seconds hold at the top, and 8 breaths on the exhale, and you do that for 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes a day, that's mindfulness. And we know from functional imaging that your amygdala actually cools down. And what does your amygdala do? Anxiety and depression. So areas of your prefrontal cortex, the amygdala. So, when that aneurysm ruptures, it's very easy to start catastrophizing, right? You're like, oh shit, the aneurysm ruptured. I'm gonna lose 5 liters of blood. Patient's gonna die. I'm gonna get sued. No one's gonna refer me aneurysm. I mean, this is default mode thinking. This is ruminating. This is how our brain works. So how do you stop that process? And no one teaches you this. They just expect you to know how to handle this. And I think it's important for us, and we wanted to show this on the show, that we go through this. We're imperfect humans that are dealing with life and death situations. So that ability to center ourselves, bring our attention to our breathing, and actually calm us, not just in surgery, but outside of surgery. And that's where the mindful moment started in our operating room. And actually, we had a manifest moment instead of our mindful moment on Thursday, where we started manifesting good thoughts. So, this is just our way to keep, again, our staff healthy and well, and to generate that culture of excellence, but also that culture of understanding. And to me, gratefulness is just a way to put it all together in one word that I can kind of keep tucked away to remind me how to achieve peak performance.
Awesome. So kind of building off of what we were talking about with catastrophic thinking or catastrophic living. So you guys dealt with, COVID, you were really devastated by it. Can you talk about how your leadership had to, kind of change during this time of crisis?
I'm sort of getting goosebumps. When I think about what we went through in COVID, it was just incredible. I mean, absolutely incredible. I live up in Westchester County, New York, and so we had the second U.S. case. The first case was in Seattle, and the second case was the attorney from White Plains, New York, which was basically on March 6th of 2020, was a Wednesday. It was March 4th, I think, of 2020, which is a Wednesday, when we knew that my school district right next door, that there was COVID in the community. And I remember calling David. We were supposed to go to dinner that Thursday night at a restaurant. I said, David, we can't go to dinner. We can't be indoors. And he kind of mocked me a little bit. He goes, this is nothing, the kind of stuff we were hearing. I said, David, we got to shut it down. We got to shut the department down. And one of my daughters was supposed to go to a volleyball tournament in Boston. One of my sons was supposed to go to Alabama My daughter's supposed to go to Alabama for a civil rights trip, and my son was supposed to go to DC, all on that weekend. And I looked at all of them. I said, "You're not going anywhere." And I got a lot of blowback, both from the just the organizations. I really got ridiculed. And I actually tweeted, I think, on that Friday that the government had to shut down for a week, and everyone had to, shelter in place for 1 week. I tweeted this, and I got a lot of blowback for it. And if you look back on the data, had the United States sheltered in place for that first week in March, it would have significantly reduced, at least early on, the spread of the disease. And we went into work that Friday, and I was doing a lot of glioblastoma research. So we knew we were going to shut down the department. We were the first department in the hospital to actually shut down. We voluntarily said we're only going to do emergent or urgent cases. We're going to redeploy our staff to help with COVID. And then we shut down our research enterprise and dedicated our entire effort to researching COVID. So we went in that Saturday, and remember, we're going in. David actually organized a call with a scientist from Wuhan. So we had a 7 a.m. call that Saturday with a bunch of people from Wuhan, China. And I'll never forget this. We were all hunched around David's laptops. None of us were wearing masks. And the scientists in Wuhan, the surgeons in Wuhan, were sitting in chairs all 6 feet apart with masks. And one of the guys in our group said, "Tell us what we need to do." And they all started laughing. And we were like, "Why are they laughing at us?" Because we had an interpreter. And when the prompt came along, the bottom of the screen, they basically said, "Start wearing masks now." And those words, I'll never forget them coming across. We just pivoted. And for the next 2 months, we did clinical trials for COVID. I would put in, I got these hoods made, because remember, I had to go and consent these patients who were spewing virus. We had no idea what the transmissibility was. We assumed we were all going to get infected. And then they were alone. There were no visitors. And so they can barely breathe. And I'm screaming through this hood saying, "Would you consent to have us trial convalescent plasma?" And they would sign the form, and then I'd walk out. And we trialed Pepsid, convalescent plasma, all these new drugs. And that's what we did. We didn't do any glioblastoma research. And that was really an incredible, incredible experience. There was one day where the hospital ran out of oxygen. We had so many vented patients that the oxygen ran out. So everybody had to run to a patient with an ambu bag and start pumping. So at one point, the alarm sounded, everyone grabbed an ambu bag who was in the hospital and started ventilating these sick patients. So it was wartime. And I mean, it continues to be wartime. But, I was telling someone last night that the relationships that we developed with the nurses, the pulmonary docs, the ICU docs, the administrators, we had a lot more respect for our administrative leadership. I mean, they were there 24/7 also. And so that really helped the bonding of the hospital. I think there was some burnout, but there was a lot of bonding, and that bonding exists today. So when I see these people in the hallway, I say, "Oh yeah, I remember you. I bumped into you, in the hallway, venting that patient." So that's what we did during COVID. And, our staff was grateful. I ran around the neighborhood grabbing N95 masks. I remember taking my son to St. Barnabas Hospital in the Bronx and donating a bunch of N95 masks after a bunch of nurses died. So those are like really impactful moments that I think we'll obviously never forget.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. And I feel like there's definitely a Grey's Anatomy episode about running out of oxygen and having to ventilate with an ambu bag.
Yeah.
Something that you lived that in person.
It's funny when we released the show, and obviously we met with the Grey's Anatomy cast, and right. we developed a respect for what they do. Obviously, they liked what we do, but what I really grew to respect, obviously the craziness of Grey's Anatomy is not always reflective, but what people really don't understand, and I think what was so great about the show and what we hope to show in the next iteration of our Netflix show, is you can't possibly script what we see on a given day. I mean, I have stories from yesterday that are just off the charts, just incredible, and funny. Some of the stuff that is said to us is like, I can't repeat it here, but what patients say and do. And it's just a lot of fun. And it's a lot of fun to share those stories. But that people think, oh, you'll never see that on Grey's Anatomy. I'm like, yeah, actually, that stuff actually sometimes happen. I mean, yeah, like the train wrecks and the blah, 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 God forbid that doesn't happen. But, there are certain elements that show that have eerie familiarity.
Very interesting. I think one thing that sort of stuck out, in watching the show was the relationship that especially Dr. Langer seemed to have with the administrator, and I can't remember her name, but
Yeah.
there was that kind of back and forth. So can you talk more generally about, your relationship with hospital administration and how you kind of go about balancing that in your everyday practice?
It's so funny because I just got off the phone with an administrator on a Saturday morning. You and I, we didn't go into medicine to have to deal with administration. I come from a long line of physicians in my family. My great grandfather graduated from Yale Medical School in 1900. There was no administration, right? He went into practice. He went into practice in Brooklyn Eye and Ear Hospital at the time, which doesn't exist. And he practiced medicine for his community in Park Slope, Brooklyn. And now my grandfather, my father, and I we're all doctors. Now I don't, practice for the community. I practice for the administration. I get a spreadsheet every month on my productivity, how many RVUs, relative value units, I work. There's actually a formula for how many RVUs are assigned to each procedure. So everything's procedure incentivized, which is terrible. There's 10 administrators for every physician in the health system. That's the national figure. There's 10 administrators for every doctor in a system. And there's a lot of bureaucratic red tape, and it's no fault of anybody's. My dad in the 60s, he loathed the beginnings of Medicare and Medicaid at the time because it was this massive government intervention in what him and my great-grandfather and grandfather were doing in Brooklyn. What do I need the government telling me? But obviously, quickly, he realized the value of having that safety net and the importance of that. But that has morphed into, obviously, undeniably, a very fragmented system. And it's beyond the scope of this discussion, although it's important for you guys to realize that there will be changes, hopefully for the good, that allow us to expand the safety net that is important for our population, our diverse and expanding population, particularly for the underprivileged, and to provide excellent care. And it's a difficult balance. You look at countries like Canada compared to us, or the UK. It's challenging. I have a nurse friend up in ICU in Montreal, and she says the doctors, it used to be that healthcare in Canada, the doctors were not incentivized, obviously, because healthcare is covered by the government. So is college for all Canadians. And those are really two of the biggest costs for Americans. But now those doctors are being squeezed and they're being judged. And so their system is becoming a little bit more like ours. We're trying to become a little bit more like theirs. And what you guys need to recognize is medicine today is not going to be necessarily the medicine you're practicing in 20 years. And I think there's value to that. I don't like all aspects of how we're practicing. I don't like being judged based on an RVU. I don't like that there are 10 administrators for every doctor. So there's a lot of fat in the system. We need to slice it and make it a little bit more lean. And obviously, some of the incentivization of our doctors needs to be changed.
Yeah, I think there was an article in JAMA just in the past couple of weeks about those administrative costs, and sharing some of that data. So it's definitely an interesting facet for us to understand. And I'm glad that the medical school curriculum seems to be moving more towards helping you understand the health system science.
Yeah,
I don't know if that was something that you really got much education in when you were in school.
none.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what I didn't get any education in. The economics of healthcare, in stress reduction or stress management, personal well-being or self-care. We were taught very rigorous, physiology and then pathophysiology and then clinical rotations. So it was very structured. You started with pathology, you went to pathophysiology, then you went to the patient. That was medical school.
Well, I want to definitely open the floor to any attendees that have questions. So anybody that wants to unmute, please just raise your hand and I can give you permission to do that, or feel free to put a question in the Q&A or in the chat box.
Hi, JB. Just wanted to say hi. Thank you for coming
Hi,
today.
Devin. Where the heck are you?
I'm at Westchester Medical Center doing a neurosurgery call day.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for working on a Saturday. Say hi to my colleagues up there.
I will. All right. Thank you so much.
And thanks for inviting me.
Of course.
Maybe while we just wait for any questions to roll in, can you talk about, the value of pursuing some, maybe more formal leadership training, whether it's through an MBA or the CNS Leadership Institute, things like that? Or do you think it really is something that you just learn on the job informally?
It's a really good question. We have all of these executive training opportunities. You can go to Harvard for 2 weeks and get this healthcare MBA, and go to Wharton and get an MBA. And you either got it or you don't, in my opinion, to some extent. Do I think and I do think, particularly in this age of how I think there's value to diversity training. I think there's value to certain elements of leadership. But if you're telling me about leadership, like a leadership training conference, I think there's value to it. Do I think getting an MBA is absolutely necessary? It really depends what you want to do. If you wanted to go into healthcare administration, I think it's valuable. If you want to stay as a surgeon, I don't think you need to do it, obviously. But I think these courses in these short, week-long or 2-week courses in diversity training are important. I think the healthcare environment is a challenging environment, and particularly in this day and age, I think that training is important. But we also do that training. I just had to do 8 hours of online training, which I do yearly. When it comes to leadership, it can hurt, particularly at the early stages of your career, to do those kind of opportunities. I did not do them. I don't think it took away from my leadership, opportunities or how I go about leading my staff every day. But if you feel like you want those lessons, then definitely do the CNS leadership course or do the 2-week, Harvard course. I think there's value to that.
Thank you for sharing all that. I'm not seeing any other questions rolling in, but fortunately we've got a list here. So, you mentioned a lot talking about, kind of athletic relations to the practice of neurosurgery. How do you, maybe view yourself as a coach to the residents and, medical students that you train?
Yeah, it's funny, when we interview them, we're doing interviews every Tuesday. I think sports is a very good analogy to what residency training is. And it's not just, basketball or soccer or team sports. The reason why sports as a young adult, it could be sport in, it doesn't have to be sport. It could be other skill training. So if you're a concert flautist or something like that, again, those skills of deliberate practice and developing muscle memory, I like to see that in people that I'm choosing to be my residents, because that shows that this is the kind of person that's going to take the deliberate practice, understands what flow state means, and probably has had to use some sort of mindfulness training because Andre Agassi, who's a professional tennis player, used to say the training was actually horrible. It's unpleasant. Residency is at times exceedingly unpleasant, but in that actually unpleasantry is actually, unfortunately, and this is scientifically shown, it's part of that deliberate practice. So being a coach and a mentor, as these residents are dealing with these, you can actually, put it in the right framework that says you are developing your skill set appropriately. There's something called the flow channel, whereas for every skill you have, and for every problem, you're the appropriate skill, meaning that you develop the ability to clip any size aneurysm, for example. You always want to be in the flow channel. And so when the residents, are really getting burnt out or they're having struggles, basically coaching them and allowing them to prosper despite their despair is going to be, that's what a coach does. It's like anything else. When you're a coach of a basketball team, when, you have an 8-loss skid, I'm a Knicks fan, so, it's a painful existence to sometimes watch, the Knicks, but, a great coach allows, the players to excel even when it's tough. And so to me, that's what's so much fun about, and it's not just the residents. I have it with the single moms who are nurses that go through difficult moments, and they do the same back to me when I need their support.
Awesome. So we have a question here from Ryan. What have been the most influential routines and habits you've acquired over the course of your career, such as mindfulness? And what are ones that you might particularly recommend for students to develop now?
Exercise for me, which is I have to exercise. So exercise is the most important thing. I have incorporated every day some element of exercise. And I did that. I'll never forget the story. I went to Penn as I was an intern. Maybe I was a second-year resident. And I was always interested in exercise. I made it my priority. And I went running. I left the hospital, University of Pennsylvania. I went running in between cases on Franklin Field, which is the stadium at Penn. We're right across the street from the hospital. So on the way back after my run in between cases, I ran into Sean Grady, who's the chair of neurosurgery at Penn. He goes, "John, what the hell are you doing?" I'm like, "I just ran between cases." He goes, "What resident has ever run between cases?" I go, "I don't know. I like to, it's a big part of what keeps me sane." He goes, "Get your ass back inside and get the next case going." I'm like, "I am." So I have made it a part of my life. And again, that's just one example. I wasn't allowed to do it. I wasn't expected to do it. But that to me has become a huge part of my life. And I'm not just talking about like, I just did 10 minutes of a Peloton, strength training on my floor, just, core work. And that to me is enough, for this period of time. Every single day I do some sort of exercise, unless I just can't find the time. And so I started that at a very young age. And to me, that has been extremely valuable. Mindfulness came to me late in life. Mindfulness should be part of your exercise. Is that clear? Does that answer Ryan's question?
Yeah, I think that was great. Maybe just one last question to kind of close out here. So you wear a lot of hats. You do a lot of different things as a surgeon, as a scientist, and as a leader. How do you balance it all? Plus, having a family.
That's a magic question. So everyone calls it work-life balance. I call it life-work balance. I made time for myself. I have 4 kids. We have 4 kids who are 5.5 years apart. I've been married for 21 years since I was a resident. I met my wife as a 4th-year medical student. So, we went through residency together. The truth is I balance it, but I don't balance it. It's organized chaos. And that's why reading Full Catastrophe, the full catastrophe is what you just said. That's what we call it. When we say full catastrophe living, we live the full catastrophe: work, research, clinical practice, education, and family life. And only thing I can tell you is if you don't make time for work outside of work life, there's enough work to keep you busy 24/7. You have to say no. David Langer will say, "John, we have a dinner tonight. We're meeting the doctors from Northern Western." So I'm like, I'm not coming. I need to be home. I want to be home for my kids. And you have to say no sometimes. And I've been saying no for a lot of years. And I think obviously you want to not to say no too much early in your career, but you really want to be, and this gets back to the very first thing I said an hour ago, the discipline of organizing your time and being very, very regimented early. And I did this, my friends from Penn used to make fun of me when I went to medical school. I would be very regimented. So we would go out, let's say socially, and I'd say, okay, it's 11:01, I got to go. And I knew they would call it the wrath of John. I was very regimented. And I think being regimented with your time is very important early on. It sets the tone for allowing you to have a life outside of work. And you can't just have a life of work. The burnout rate is 60% or higher.
Hey everyone, Ryan Rad here from Neurosurgerytraining.org. If you like that video, subscribe and donate to keep our content available for medical students across the world.